What is up, everyone? All right, today I'm going to be talking about some nonfiction books that I am interested in reading. Most of them I don't actually own, but I'm going to start by talking about the two nonfiction books that I actually do own. Also, I'm pretty easy to influence on Discord in terms of, what should I read next? So if you guys want me to read and talk about a specific book, definitely let me know in the comments below or in my Discord, and I will take your suggestions into consideration. First, of course, Naomi Klein, On Fire. This is her most recent book, I think. I believe it came out at the end of 2019. And in this book, she talks about like climate activism and, youth climate strikes and stuff of that nature. And we've got a Greta Thunberg quote on the back. Quote, Naomi Klein's work has always moved and guided me. She is the great chronicler of our age of climate emergency and inspirer of generations. And yeah, I mean, that's great. That's exactly it. I read like the intro and maybe first chapter of this book like a while ago, and then I got distracted by other books. So goes the booktube life. And of course, I'm reading Shock Doctrine right now very slowly. So I plan to get through this first and then go to this at some point later this year. Next, we've got Boom, How to Hide an Empire. I got this one a while ago as well. Oh, this is by Daniel Immerwahr. Yeah, I don't know how you guys want to pronounce that name, but yeah. A History of the Greater United States. So we've got the United States on the cover here, and then we've got a bunch of territories. We've got Alaska, which is not a territory right now, obviously. It's a state, same with Hawaii. And then we've got a bunch of territories, and then it'll also talk about military bases and stuff of that nature, bases that are overseas, of course. And it'll go through the history of like how and why the U.S. has all these bases and all these colonies overseas, or now they're called territories, but essentially they're still colonies. And then, I mean, if you think about it, like Hawaii, think about Hawaii. What is the biggest moment in U.S. history that happened in Hawaii? And of course, the thing that probably comes to mind is D-Day. And Hawaii was definitely not a state then. It was a territory. And at the time that the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened in Hawaii, most people, like in the mainland, did not care about random islands in the Pacific that the U.S. had colonized over the last 100 years. And also, we were not in World War II at that point. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt's struggle at that time was, okay, how do we get people to care about this island that no one in politics or no one in the states of America at the time, the 48 states, no one cared about this island. So how do we get people to care about the island? And it's interesting because Japan actually attacked 3 U.S. territories at the same time. I believe it was like Guam and somewhere else as well. But FDR only talked about the attack on Hawaii. And even to this day, like in school, we only think about it as like one Japanese attack on the U.S., even though it was 3 separate attacks. And the one on Hawaii was a lot less bloody and murderous than the other ones. But FDR basically was like, yeah, Hawaii is our last line of defense against Japan. So now we have to go into the war. And I mean, if you think about like that moment in time, you can like kind of parallel it with hurricane relief efforts within Puerto Rico. And there's a certain section of the U.S. population that didn't care about Hawaii in the 40s. There's maybe like a similar section of the United States who doesn't care about like the Puerto Rican people and like helping them with hurricane relief. And of course, unfortunately, the president at that time did not care about Puerto Ricans and helping with hurricane relief. And almost all of the president's supporters didn't care that the president didn't care about helping with hurricane relief in Puerto Rico, which was very sad. And while President Trump's handling of Puerto Rico was particularly grotesque, there are many people, even within the Democratic Party, who also are pretty in favor of exploiting Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans through large multinational corporations who want to privatize different parts of the island for tourism and, natural resource extraction. And they want to do that by putting Puerto Rico in a large amount of debt and, austerity and all this sort of stuff. And they did that through this like debt oversight corrupt board sort of thing called Promesa. And, I remember talking about this in the Democratic primary because who voted for that bill and who did not vote for that bill was, pretty enlightening to people's different sort of politics. And the people who voted against this sort of like privatization and this sort of exploitation of the Puerto Rican people, that was Bernie Sanders, of course, Elizabeth Warren, and Cory Booker. So credit to those three. Obviously, no credit to Kamala Harris and Amy Klobuchar, who voted the wrong way. And, those mass protests that we saw in 2019 in Puerto Rico among their people, they were very against the Promesa bill that we in the United States pushed onto them. And, they're a territory, right? They don't have any control over like what we do. They don't have any seats in the House. They don't have any seats in the Senate. And I know like the conversation about Puerto Rican statehood is difficult and people have different opinions and blah, blah, blah. I get it. Like Puerto Rican self-determination has been, very hotly debated. But what basically everyone other than like multinational exploitative companies agree with is that what is going on right now is bad. Or at least bad for the people of Puerto Rico. And that's why the Puerto Ricans, just like massive protests. And yeah, this sort of like exploitation of Latin America will be a theme in the books that I talk about. So stay tuned. Also, I just have too many books to talk about, I'm coming to realize. So I'm going to divide this into 2 videos. This video is going to be books that I've heard about that are nonfiction that I want to read. And then this part 2 will be next week. And it's not necessarily the books that I want to read that I'll be talking about next week, but it's the authors and the authors' lives maybe that are inspiring. So like Nelson Mandela's autobiography will be next week. It's not because I heard like his autobiography is great. Like that's not why I want to read that. It's because, I know how he is as a person and what he's done and just his fight against apartheid in South Africa. And that's why I want to read that book. All right, so let's get into it. This book, when I heard about it, I was interested. This is How to Read a Book, the classic guide to intelligent reading. Originally published in 1940, but it keeps getting updated, apparently, according to this. And yeah, so How to Read a Book is interesting to me, even though I am college educated and I do have the skills to, read a book, I guess. Sometimes I'm in subject matters that I don't know like a ton about or anything about, but you can still like gain value even if you don't know every word on the page or even if you aren't familiar with every concept. And this book might be a good framework and a good like way of thinking about reading books that you aren't super comfortable with or you don't have like too much background information on. And even in like fiction and fantasy, I know Elliot Brooks reviewed Senlin Ascends a while ago. I believe the title to the video was I'm Too Dumb for This Book or something. I think like everyone's too dumb for the books of Babel books, but maybe like this book would be like a good book if you're like feeling intimidated by a book or you're in a book and it feels like it's a little too much for you. Maybe this has good coping mechanisms even for like non-fiction readers, so like fiction readers. Yeah, the next books are gonna be more definitely non-fiction-ish, definitely real world, some like political stuff. Definitely my political ideology will be showing. But again, you all can harass me and tell me why I'm wrong in my Discord or in the comments below. I'm totally okay with that. Just don't pick fights with like random other commenters for no reason. But yes, anyway, this one, Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty. Definitely the classic economics book. And by classic book, I mean like this book is the gold standard. And when I talked about the article Why Socialism by Albert Einstein, in that article, Einstein like strongly criticizes economics for being too insular in its thought. Here, let's come over here. So like regular economics, you'll like open the textbook or whatever, and then there'll be like a thing here like supply, demand, and then like this middle point, that's exactly where you want to be. And they'll use models like that, and it's like, okay, but do these models actually play out in real life? And Unlearning Economics had a great like 40-minute video about how conventional economic thinking is empirically incorrect on the minimum wage. And it's because conventional economic thinking a lot of times can just be too theoretical and not reality based enough. And like I'll give an example as well. So there's been a lot of studies on healthcare in the United States, and most of the studies, well, there's some studies that are done by like right-wing think tanks, and it's like, okay, there probably is a political ideology that's influencing the results of these studies. And then there are a lot of studies from like universities and stuff, which is great. But like usually what are considered the best studies are the studies that are done cooperatively between economists and epidemiologists, because epidemiologists are like, well, here are actually all the costs that you have to factor in when looking at like a private insurance system. And it's because, they're experts, and economists know like very little about public health unless they just happen to have a doctorate in both public health and like economics, which, almost no one does. And now coming back to this book takes like that better perspective, that more like cooperative perspective, or from what I understand, at least. I haven't read the book yet. So this is like, basic economics in a more like realistic, applicable sort of context, if that makes sense. And like, look at this. The main driver of inequality, the tendency of returns on capital to exceed the rate of economic growth, today threatens to generate extreme inequalities that stir discontent and undermine democratic values. So again, we're talking about a lot of stuff in here. Income inequality, democracy, and stuff that like, basic econ sometimes misses. So yeah, I'm very interested in reading this. Let me know if you guys are interested in reading this as well in the comments. And moving along. Next, A Brief History of Neoliberalism. Boom, David Harvey. And then on the front we have, this is Ronald Reagan, this is Margaret Thatcher, this is the dude that preceded Mao in China, whose name I'm drawing a blank on right now, and this is Pinochet, who was the dictator in Chile. So yeah, what is neoliberalism? What does that mean? And people might see the word liberal and be like, oh, that's cool. Like, gay people can marry who they want, and like women's rights and feminists and stuff, and like, democracy and voting. And, to some extent, yeah, that's true. But like, obviously, if you know Ronald Reagan, he was like horrible to like gay people and black people, and, criminalized drugs to an insane level. And like, our prisons are overflowing from, low-level drug crimes that happened over 30 years ago. And like, is China liberal? Well, no, not exactly. So neoliberalism is more of an economic or ideology that you're taking. So let's go over here. When in doubt, Google the word. So neoliberalism is contemporarily used to refer to market-oriented reform politics such as eliminating price controls, deregulating capital markets, lowering trade barriers, and reducing, especially through privatization and austerity, state influence in the economy. So let's look at these things one at a time and try to determine what's going on here. So is this good? Is this bad? Look, it's an ideology, so you guys can all have your opinion. But I mean, if you've been watching me or talked to me at all, you would know I'm not really a fan of neoliberalism. And like, let's take this one at a time. Eliminating price controls. There are some industries where I'm in favor of there being no price controls. Like, shoes, I'm like fine if, some companies have like insanely expensive shoes. I mean, I won't buy any Yeezys or anything, but like I get that some people want to buy them. So, but like, think about like insulin, right? There's like no person out there who has diabetes who's like I could just like not buy insulin and be like totally fine and not have health problems. No, like that would cause them extreme health problems. So in this country, you have to pay like $600 for insulin. Is that right? Yes or no? In like a modern, civilized, good society? And to me, the answer is no. So this extreme elimination of all price controls, the way neoliberals like to advocate for, that's bad. It goes beyond insulin and prescription drugs. It goes through healthcare more broadly, and hospital visits in this country, in the United States particularly. Like, healthcare isn't like a commodity. People aren't like, oh, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm bored. I decided to get like a chest x-ray. No one's doing that. So at times there should be state influence in the economy. There should be regulated markets such as like, prescription drugs. And, these markets being incredibly unregulated leads to people seeing that the markets are unregulated and seeing that the markets are screwing people over by charging exorbitant amounts for prescription drugs, that they don't trust these pharmaceutical companies. Why do you think anti-vaxxers exist? Now, to be clear, like, everyone go get vaccines. Like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Everyone get vaccinated for, everything. It's super important. Measles, mumps, rubella. Get vaccinated for this current plague that we're in, the flu, just all the vaccinations. Get all of them. But these companies, these pharmaceutical companies specifically, who are manufacturing the vaccines, have atrocious track records of just doing things and pushing things into the market and charging insane amounts. And these companies are extraordinarily untrustworthy. And to clarify, these companies are untrustworthy when it comes to some things, but they're not untrustworthy when it comes to vaccines. But when a company is a lying company, people will remember the lies and not trust the company when they're telling the truth. It's like a boy that cried wolf situation, And yeah, it's that sort of distrust in institutions that causes these people to unfortunately have dumb views on vaccines. And yeah, that's what we saw happen under Reagan in the United States and under Thatcher in the UK. We saw a mass deregulation of markets. Now, someone like Obama or the Clintons are often referred to as neoliberals as well. And some people might say, well, that's unfair. They aren't in favor of deregulating like the CDC or whatever. In fact, they probably want to spend more money on the CDC than someone like Reagan. And it's like, well, they also want to regulate Wall Street more than, the Bush administration, for instance. And it's like, yes, well, that's true. But we are in, more broadly, a neoliberal era. And Obama's regulations on Wall Street are far less than what they were before the neoliberal era. So when someone like Barack Obama is called a neoliberal, it's because he's adhering to the framework of neoliberalism that's set out and laid out in this book over here. And in addition to that, Obama did explicitly do neoliberal policies that are just unquestionably neoliberal, like making the Bush tax cuts permanent, or working with Mitch McConnell to try to cut Social Security. I think those are explicitly neoliberal things to do. Like cutting programs like that, that's the definition of austerity, correct? And when we're talking about neoliberalism, like, it's fine to acknowledge that, like, not every regulation is good by definition, of course, but many of the regulations we need. Like, do you want water companies to be deregulated so to the point where they can sell you like contaminated water? No, of course not. Do you want electric companies to be deregulated? Well, I think that happened in California, right? And that started like mass fires last summer. So no, we don't want that. And oh yeah, in Texas this winter, my goodness, like that was just horrible. They regulate their electric grid on the state level, and and by regulate, I mean they don't regulate. So yeah, I mean that led to like mass power outages and people freezing to death and stuff. Just horrible outcomes. And like when we're talking about neoliberalism, sorry, just last thing, that's like a feature, not a bug. It would have cost money for them to regulate the Texas power grid. And, the owners of the electric companies in Texas probably made a ton of money, like over the last few years, over the last few decades, from not having to spend money regulating power lines and stuff. And yeah, sometimes the word neoliberal is overused, and like, again, sometimes it's hard because sometimes like someone like Obama does very neoliberal stuff, and sometimes he does like, regular social democrat stuff. And it's tough, right? Because like something like the Affordable Care Act in the United States, which Obama passed, is that policy neoliberal? Well, in a lot of ways, it regulated insurance companies, and some of the regulations made it so that insurance companies couldn't like sell you scam insurance, and it did stuff like that. And that would be something considered not neoliberal, but at the same time, it kept the private insurance companies in power, which is like the neoliberal dream, right? Like other countries have public state-run health insurance, and they spend way less money per person on health insurance. A lot of countries spend like half of what we do per person, and they have everyone insured, which we do not in this country, and they have equal to or better health outcomes than our country. So, like, the broad system of the Affordable Care Act is neoliberal, even though there are specific regulations in the Affordable Care Act that are not neoliberal. It's about, like, the broader power structure, though, and that is neoliberal, and that is why I call Obama a neoliberal. I call the Clintons neoliberals. I call the majority of the Democratic Party neoliberal. And I'm spending so much time on this because we're going to look at kind of neoliberalism through a few different lenses in this video. I hope you guys enjoy my longer talks. This is kind of a weird video, so hopefully I'm not losing anyone. All right. Now we've got Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. I know that he worked for the World Bank, and if you don't know what the World Bank is, congratulations, you're a normal person. But yeah, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund basically offer poorer countries, third world countries, loans, and there are kind of strings attached with these loans. Obviously, you have to pay back the loans, they're loans, and you have to like be open to trading with other countries. And by trade, a lot of times that means sell your country's natural resources. And yeah, so this guy worked at the World Bank. He did that. He's kind of like the Benedict Arnold of the World Bank for writing this book. It says in the synopsis, he says he was threatened and bribed in an effort to kill the project. But after 9/11, he finally decided to go through with this expose of his former professional life. And yeah, interesting. Worked with U.S. intelligence agencies when he was with the World Bank. Blackmailed foreign leaders into serving U.S. policy and awarded lucrative contracts to U.S. businessmen. So yeah, it'll go into like the details of kind of like the neoliberal special interest and, large multinational corporations. It'll go over how those companies have exploited the global south, the third world, and all of that. Yeah, so it should be interesting. Blah, blah, blah. Here's more over here. And yeah, let's move on. Because this one, very similar. It focuses on Latin America, but it's definitely kind of like the same concept of the global south being exploitative. Sorry, this is Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent by Eduardo Galeano. Oh, and introduction by Isabel Allende, who is a famous writer, so some of you may know her. I haven't read anything by her, but yes. And this book came out in like the early 70s, I believe. First published 1971. And yeah, talking about natural resources here and how they're basically taken from the global south. Like they're forced to mine gold and silver and stuff, and U.S. companies just take them, rubber, coffee. Where do you get your coffee? Is it Starbucks? That's an American company, right? they're making a ton of money, right? Where are the coffee beans from? Colombia maybe? Ethiopia? I'm not a coffee snob. I'm sorry, I don't know where. But yeah, I mean, it's probably somewhere in the global south. I mean, this isn't to shame coffee drinkers. Like, I drink coffee. Like, everyone drinks coffee. We've got to make our sacrifice to the gods of the caffeine. And, it is what it is. But I guess it's just something to think about. Also, manganese. Have we heard about this word since 10th grade chemistry class? I certainly haven't. So yeah, a lot of history in this one, I'm sure. Colonization, and most countries in Central and South America aren't colonies now, but they're still being exploited. And again, like I was talking about in How to Hide an Empire, Elon Musk is still getting his lithium from Bolivia. And, these countries are still being exploited, even though they're not colonies. And, the people of these countries are still, they aren't getting a return on all the natural resources that we're taking from them. So, yeah, I don't know, something to think about. And let's move on. An Indigenous peoples of history of the United States. This one I've heard a decent amount about. I hear good things. I don't know, too much about Indigenous people's history. I just know that we've screwed them over as well. Again, the neoliberal ideology is hey, let's build a pipeline through your Native American burial grounds. And if that makes us money, that's a good thing. And I think that's kind of the first time I realized when Native Americans were getting really screwed over, or at least the first time I looked into it more was the Dakota Access Pipeline thing in 2016. And basically, the U.S. government was allowing this pipeline to go through Native American lands, which is par for the course when we look at the Indigenous people's history of the United States. The U.S. government is always allowing any company to do whatever they want to Indigenous people's lands. But I think I had fallen into this trap that Obama's going to make us better, or his people that he's implemented are going to make us better. And we aren't going to do that stuff anymore. We're not going to make new pipelines that we don't need to build. But yeah, I was wrong in 2014, 2015. And, some government officials and politicians are phenomenal at this sort of, lip service to indigenous people's issues, or, black people's issues, women's issues, all LGBT issues. They're good at the lip service, but they aren't actually good at, stopping companies from exploiting these people. And Obama will, celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, but allow the oil companies to desecrate Indigenous people's lands. That is a great example of neoliberalism within the last 5 to 10 years. In terms of Black Lives Matter, some cities are commissioning African-American artists to paint a mural of George Floyd downtown. And it's that's a wonderful thing to do. That's great. But how are they actually reforming the police? Are they actually reforming the police? Are they demilitarizing the police? Are they stopping the over-criminalization of low-level drug offenses? And, it varies city to city, town to town. But a lot of times the answer is straight up no. A lot of times, the mayors of these cities and towns are in the pocket of the police unions, and they're in the pocket of the the prison industrial complex. And again, that's just neoliberalism. It's just kind of manifesting in new ways. But yeah, let's move on. Here we go. A Dictator's Handbook, Why Bad Behavior is Almost Always Good, by Bruno Bueno de Mesquita. Excuse me. I hope that's right. I'm sorry. These Spanish names, I don't speak Spanish, so I do my best, I think. So this is for some of my more cynical friends out there, people who are cynical about politics. So let's take a look at this. This clever and accessible book shows the difference between tyrants and democrats is just a convenient fiction. Governments do not differ in kind, but only the number of essential supporters or backs that need scratching. The size of this group determines almost everything about politics, what leaders can get away with, and the quality of life or misery under them. Boom. This is great in terms of, just kind of be in a different framework. Because a lot of times, we presuppose that government officials, particularly government officials that we like and we think are doing good work, we presuppose that their goal is democracy. They love democracy, and they always do the right thing. And look, this video, for instance, came out. Wait a minute, you can't see it. No, oh my gosh, don't do that. Can I move my face? There we go. Okay, this video came out May 30th, 2020. So after the start of this plague that we are in, but before the New York nursing home scandal that implicated Andrew Cuomo and him pushing the state of New York to undercount nursing home deaths. Now, with a more cynical lens on Andrew Cuomo and on these politicians, it was predictable that that would be their motive prior to that actual scandal coming out. And I'm going to show a clip of someone very easily kind of as a throwaway line predicting that happening. Let's take a look.
Also, another point, let's just dispense with the notion that Glenn Beck and Dave Rubin are somehow against people like Cuomo and de Blasio when they say they want to they want to keep us closed forever. No, those guys love these guys saying let's reopen things because they want to reopen too. And all these their incentives is to get this shit over. And if all of a sudden we don't know about 200 deaths a day being undercounted, that'd be even better. That's the actual incentive here. These guys are on the sides. Yeah. Anyway, that's the point.
Yeah. No, that's really important. That's a really, really important point.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show.
Yeah. And now, to be clear, obviously, guys, Cuomo was less bad than Trump at responding to this plague. But again, at the end of the day, if you have this more cynical view and maybe a more, I don't know, adversarial view, I guess, kind of on politicians, sometimes that's very much warranted, very much needed. It would have been nice if maybe a journalist with a larger platform actually looked into that at some point. It could have saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives in New York State. However, the journalists throughout New York basically just really praised Cuomo endlessly. And it's not like he deserves no praise or anything. But at the end of the day, this dude did some horrible things. He cut Medicaid at the start of the plague. How many people did that kill? And yeah, Cuomo, neoliberal, cutting social programs, etc., etc. And guys, obviously I'm not calling Cuomo a dictator, but I'm saying he has dictatorial tendencies that he's kind of shown manifest, even though he's contained by the confines of our current democracy. So he can't actually be a dictator. A lot of people made the same argument with Trump, and it's yeah, absolutely. The institutions of the U.S. kept him in check in many ways. He still did horrible and grotesque things, but they kind of kept him in check. And Cuomo would have also done worse things if he could have got away with it. 1,000%. Next, we've got the Black Jacobins. This is a history of the Haitian Revolution, which happened shortly after the American Revolution. However, the difference between this revolution and our revolution is that the slaves won. They won freedom in their own revolution. This is, I believe, the only place where that has happened, or at least it's the only place where the slaves in the Americas, the African slaves, have won independence from their colonizers, masters, etc. So yeah, it seems like a great story. Who wouldn't love this? This is by C.L.R. James. So yeah, definitely check out Black Jacobins. And sorry, my lunch break is ending because I can't shut the heck up. So Backlash, the Undeclared War Against American Women by Susan Faludi. And this is about how rights for women can get clawed back. You can think about Republican attacks on Roe v. Wade. But this book came out before that. So yeah, 1991. So yeah, it'll talk more about probably the movement, the feminist movement in the 70s and the suffrage movement. And it dispels some misogynist and false sort of tropes, but I mean, these are old tropes. Like, guys, I was born in 92. This book came out in 91. I don't know if this is a leading question or not, but do you guys think I should read something more recent in terms of feminism? I don't know. But yeah, I've got to go. But I will talk a lot more about feminism in my next video, or my next video about nonfiction books, because a lot of feminist authors are very interesting to me. Tell me which of these books you guys would like to read in the comments below. I'm always looking for friends and people to buddy read and talk about stuff with. I'll talk about politics. I'll talk about like basically anything, either in the comments below or in my Discord or in DMs. I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with, publicly talking about politics. And, a lot of people have just asked me questions privately, and that's, again, totally fine. One person asked me questions and didn't listen to my answers, so that pissed me off. And, it's fine to disagree with me, certainly. But yeah, one person was just like, like ridiculously misrepresenting my own positions. And for that, like, you absolutely have to listen. So, it is what it is. But like, basically all my interactions about this stuff have been positive and fun and, enjoyable. And I don't really mind if people get heated and stuff. Like, it happens. It's politics. I'm used to it. I know, like, some people are adverse to it, and so like I will try. So like, of course, I will try to keep a cool head. And yeah. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and see you guys next time.